Welcome to the Dunamis EQ Podcast, where we talk to people who are great leaders who lead with emotional intelligence. We hear their stories, we learn from their journeys, and we're just here to empower you to lead yourself and lead others with emotional intelligence. Today, I have the pleasure of Madeline McQueen on the podcast. Madeline, welcome. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me, Tolu. I really appreciate it.
It's my absolute pleasure. Madeline was introduced to me by Resham, one of our previous podcast guests. So thank you so much, Resham, for the introduction. Madeline, would you mind telling our guests a little bit about yourself?
So I am an executive coach. I'm a trainer and facilitator and a speaker. I host a membership club exclusively for Black and Black mixed heritage women called the Compass Club. I'm married, so I've been married to my husband. Some of you may know him, David McQueen, for the last 28 years, together for
Wow.
35. I have two daughters, 21 and 25. And what else? Yeah, youngest of six girls, born to Caribbean parents in Leicester, in the Midlands, in the UK. And yeah, my heritage is Bajan and Antiguan, so Barbados and Antigua. And yeah, I'm a lover of life and I like to laugh.
And one of the things I really liked was in your email signature, it says magnificently yours. I loved
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
I believe that everybody is born magnificent. It's just the layers of labels and other people's rubbish, really, that ends up them not seeing just how great they actually are. And so my thing is, embrace your magnificence and be magnificently you and be
Mm,
magnificent. So
mm,
yeah, I'm like, okay, let me just let everybody know, magnificently
yeah.
yours. I'm
Yeah.
magnificent too.
I feel like that word is so lost right now. I can't remember the last
Mm.
time I heard magnificent. Like it's such a rich word. So when I saw it in your email signature, it definitely put something inside me. I was like, I love that. I absolutely love that.
I appreciate it.
No problem.
People often say, can I steal that? And I'm like, knock yourself out. Of course you can.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? I was thinking, I was like, am I actually in the place where I can own that and I can wear that? And I was like, do you know what? I don't think I'm actually ready. That was that was quite an interesting realization for me. I was like, I don't know if I have the boldness to do that yet, but it was an interesting
Wow.
internal conversation. Yeah. 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 It really challenged me. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Tell me a bit about Compass. Where did that come from? What's the kind of the
Yeah,
goal for that?
so basically what I mean, when I started it, it was to be for all. In fact, it started before I even started the Compass Club. So a few years ago, back in 2018, I started a supper club that was exclusively for Black women. Because I work with leaders and I work with a whole range of
Mm,
leaders.
mm,
But I also, get a lot of Black female clients who are in leadership, and some of the struggles, the challenges, the issues that they face are unique to them. Um, and, the microaggressions, and whether being a leader or not, just walking the street sometimes can be
mm,
challenging. People expect you to move out of the way, or, you know, they expect, that or might push you without, like nudge you out the way, and just the little things that happen. And even just the way that somebody might, for a white woman, give them space, or offer them a seat but not offer a Black woman. There's the little things
mm,
that you experience just by walking the streets, and then you go into an organization and you experience it in a different way. Maybe you are the cleverest person in the room, but you get the things, oh, you're quite clever, aren't you? Or you're questioned as to
mm,
why, or given extra work. There's all these
mm,
different things that are being experienced, and they are the experiences of women, but Black women have a slight, there is a nuance there. And so I wanted to create a space. So I created a supper club that was just a space for them to be able to come, sit down, be championed and challenged, and to let go, to not have to self-police. Black women always talk to you about how they have to self-police in situations
mm,
where, you've got to think about how you say it so that you're not being accused of being aggressive, or,
mm,
and
mm,
I just wanted to create a space where they didn't have to do that. They could bring their authentic selves, you know, not have to second guess, not have to do anything. They could just be. So that started in 2018. Obviously, with the pandemic, we went online in 2020, and then I ended it in 2020. At the end of 2020, but I knew I wanted to turn it into a membership. But I was looking initially at all women in leadership, because they all face challenges and issues, and also just from that cross pollination of you can understand my issues more when we're in a community together. But as it's gone on, it's I've recognized that unique space for women, Black women, is important. And but the thing for me was about what we're very good at doing is really developing ourselves professionally, do another course, get another accreditation, do another this. But actually, it's the personal development that makes the biggest difference. It's the personal development that makes us ask for the pay that we're due, or to challenge in a particular way, or to hold boundaries. If we're not working on those things, then sometimes we're digging ourselves into a hole that nobody wants to take us out of. Because, I have this thing about, have you ever had a boss who wouldn't give you a promotion because they were dining out on your genius? And I think for a lot of Black women and women in general, that is their
Yeah.
experience. But it's learning not to work twice as hard, but to work twice as smart. And that comes from developing yourself personally, so that you can leverage that for professional success. So that's the whole reason for the club. And community. It can be very lonely in corporate spaces. And so to see other people who look like you, who work at the same level you do, is a really important thing.
It's really interesting what you said about it's the personal development that gets people to ask some of those key questions. I think for me, I'm really passionate about the fact that everybody should get paid what they're worth. And I think from my kind of management experience, I've managed actually quite a lot, mostly women, and hearing some of those conversations in terms of they're going for a job or they're going for this. I think for me, it was really sad to hear that, like, I had one lady and she said, look, here's the job description. And it had, like, let's say 10 things on it. And she's like, I can't do any of these things. And I went down it and I'm like, you've literally done every one of these things for me, right? So what's some of the personal development stuff that you talk about that helps people to have that confidence to ask for that pay rise, to ask for that job, to go for it?
So I always say it's about aligning yourself with yourself and being who you really are. That's why I talk about the layers of labels. There have been so many voices in our heads. Often I'll ask a client, whose voice is in your head? And often it isn't their own. It's somebody else's voice in their head that's then making them think they should play small. So we talk a lot about playing small and how to overcome that. But to me, I have a process. It's I turned it into an equation because I think it makes all the difference, which is clarity. And often we don't have the clarity that we need. We've never stopped because we're on the roller coaster ride of moving on to the next one and the next one and the next one. Maybe we've got headhunted, maybe we've got promoted, but actually, are we driving our own career, or is it being driven just by the wave? And what I find is that people get into maybe their 40s, their late 30s, and go, hold on a second. Whose career is this anyway? And so how are you supposed to ask for your worth if you don't even know what you really want, what your career is, what your North Star is, where you're going? So the first thing for me is about gaining real clarity about what you want, why you want it, why it's important, what you want to do, why you want to do it, who you want to do it with, all of those things, because that instantly gives you a bit of confidence. Like, I know now, like when you already, it's a booster. Then it's about building that evidence-based confidence. Now, one of the reasons, like you've identified, is that often women especially don't kind of do that. It's because we're not always cataloging our achievements, cataloging the impact, cataloging the skills and the attributes that we've gained along the journey. So I have an acronym called GREAT, which is what's good. What are your good skills, your good attributes? What's are your results? So what are the the qualifications or certificates, awards that you have received? E is what's your experience, the knowledge that you've gained or kudos you've gained by doing. And then A are the achievements. And achievements I take out of the context of just work. And the reason why I do that is because too often we're looking at the last year and going, well, I haven't achieved anything. And it's like, well, hold on, you've been on this planet for X amount of decades. It's, you can't have just done 5 things, but even we just the thing of, okay, when I was 9, I learned to ride a bike. Okay, well, what were the skills that came with learning to ride that bike? What were the attributes? The determination, the persistence, the focus, all of those things, the resilience that we kind of forget. And then, we build that evidence-based confidence. And so clarity plus confidence equals over empowerment, because suddenly you feel empowered. I know what I want to do. I know I have the ability to do it because I've quantified what I do, what I bring to the table. I've got eyes on it, and more often than we haven't. I think women especially are very good at going, I achieved this, now off to the next thing, without stopping to go, I achieved that. Which is why when we go to the next thing, we don't feel we've got anything to bring with us to it. And so we end up in imposter syndrome, for example. And then that empowerment piece, there are tools that come with that. Mistakes are, to err is human, but we've treated mistakes like we should never make any. And it's like, that's ridiculous. We learn everything through mistakes, almost. When we have that clarity, when we have that confidence, when we feel empowered and we're leaning on those tools of empowerment, it equals thrive. You can't help but thrive. So if we're not getting really clear about that, what we bring to the table and what we want, how are we supposed to ask for it? And then the other thing is that one of the things I always talk about are questions, like the basics: open questions, closed questions, and when to use them. We're often not using questions. We start with a negotiation going, can I? Or, can I have a pay rise? No. Okay, where do you go from there? Nowhere. What has to happen for me? What has to happen for me to get a pay rise in this organization? Somebody's forced to give you a more than a one-word answer, and then you can hold them to account on that. Okay, so if I was to do those things, what then happens for me to get? Do you know what I mean? You can do that. So, okay, you can just keep putting about what did you do to get into your position? Walk me through 3 main things that you did. How do so your questions, the quality of your question is I can't remember who it's by. The quality of your question impacts the quality of the answer.
Yeah, 100%.
And if we're not asking good questions and learning how to do that, now that's not necessarily about going on a questioning skills course. That is about, that's personal development and practicing that in every aspect of your life. Then actually you get better at seeking first to understand and then being understood. Like my background is sales. So once you get to understand what they want, you can start tweaking towards it. If you've got no idea, then basically what's happening is you are literally stabbing in the dark. And that's why I say personal development for professional success.
I love that, because the questions that you need to ask, you have to also have the confidence to ask those questions and be willing to have some of this. Sometimes it's quite an uncomfortable conversation, because I feel sometimes in corporate world, it's all shrouded in this mystery, of like, you don't really talk about pay. You don't really talk about how you got your pay rise, your promotion. So it can be sometimes a really uncomfortable conversation. And that takes a lot of confidence to be able to have some of those conversations.
And it also takes, that's why the clarity piece is important, and that evidence-based confidence piece, because if you don't know why you deserve it and you can't demonstrate it or give the business case for it, then why will anybody give it to you?
Because it's a business at the end of the day. You have to have a business. You have to prove why it's worth them investing the money in you. Because for the business, it's an investment. I'm an investment in the company that I work for. You mentioned that sales was your background. So what was your journey kind of from there to where you are now?
So I was one of those people who never knew what they wanted to do. I think that you get to. I think you kind of always, if you're not one of those people who's like, I want to be a doctor, I want to be that's just never been my journey. I just knew that I wanted to have impact. And I knew from very young that I had greatness within me. I just didn't know what that looked like. And so I started in customer service. My first job, I didn't go to uni. I was like, I know if I go to uni, I'm going to muck about. That was my thought process. And it's really funny because I'm having discussions in therapy about that at the moment, which is about the experiences of being a Black woman or a Black person in the education system in the 70s and 80s, and the kinds of things that you were told. But I didn't go, and I went straight into work. I worked for Sun Alliance in their customer service department, and I happened to be dating my current husband. I said current, that sounds terrible. So that's never going to happen. The changes are never going to happen. Basically, what happened was I moved down to. I needed to move to London because we'd been dating for a long time. He lived in London, I lived in Leicester, and we needed to live in the same city. So I decided to move, and I got a job. I went for a job as a customer service for a small insurance company, and I took a psychometric test and came out as the ideal salesperson. So they actually gave me the job as an advisor. Yes, selling financial products. And did really well. And from there, I moved on to a bigger company. And then when I left there, I went into IT sales, selling, those modems, the dial-up modems.
The dial-up was, yeah.
9600 modems, 28K, 28K. Way before we got to where we are now. And I really enjoyed it. I was good at it. And I went to a company called Microware, well, they weren't called Microware at the time, but they were acquired by Micro Warehouse, and became a corporate account manager, managing corporate accounts, selling IT, the whole range of IT, literally from a cable to a server. And sold the most Toshiba laptops in the country in 2000. Got sent on holiday by Toshiba, won lots of we called them spiffs, selling IT, sold kind of closed one of the biggest contracts the company had ever had for 2 million with a company called Schlumberger, and then moved into being a sales manager, team leader, running a team worth 14 million a year in revenue. And then I had a miscarriage, and I was under a lot of pressure. It's a very stressful world and a very male boys club environment too. And I just said, I'm done. I'm out. And I left before maternity because I said, because I got pregnant again. And I just said, I'm not losing another baby to my job. So I left. And after having, that was my second child, and my oldest was starting to go into school, like nursery. And I just realized, no, I'm not doing this anymore. And so I became a stay-at-home mom, but I couldn't. It's just not in my nature to do nothing. So Dave had a business. I, kind of got involved in that. I started doing sales consulting. That moved into business consulting, then coaching. I took a coaching course, moved into, and started coaching, but on and off. And I started coaching and consulting business owners and spending time with them. And I realized that a lot of the time, the challenges that those business owners were facing was confidence. And for a long time, I didn't really know what I wanted to do next, but confidence kept coming up. And I was recognizing that I was having to build confidence in order for them to be more successful. And eventually I just said, okay, I'm going to put a stake in the ground. I'm going to work with leaders around their confidence, helping them find their clarity so they can be empowered to do more, be more, achieve more. And that's how I got here. But I've always been selling because obviously as running a business, you sell. Dave and I used to do a lot of work in schools. I was the person who was often speaking to teachers and heads about, what we could do, how we could do it, and selling that in, writing programs, all of that stuff. So Yeah, and then obviously it all transpired into, okay, this is what I want to do. And so I've been doing that maybe for the last, like, focused
Mm.
for the last 6, 7 years,
Okay.
focused completely as exec coach doing this work. Um, but yeah, and I wrote a book called Close That Sale, 7 Steps to Close the Sale, Make More Money.
Okay.
Because again, the whole frustration of people just
Mm.
not being afraid of sales and afraid of
Mm.
closing. And it's like, it's a
Mm.
relationship building. That's it. And
Mm.
asking
Mm.
questions.
Mm. Where is that book available? Is it still available?
Yeah, I think it's still on Amazon. So it's there. You can get it from there, download it. It's an
Mm.
ebook that I wrote a while
Okay.
back. People who have read it, who've come back to me and gone, this has really made a difference. And I'm like, good.
Mm.
It's not rocket science. It's just the stuff that we often know and don't do.
Yeah.
Like most things.
Yeah. 100%. I would love to get the link for that, and I'll put it in the show notes so that people can also get that book.
Mhm.
Thank you thank you so much for sharing your journey. Really, 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 really interesting. How did you find it working with your husband at the beginning?
Um, I always say that, when you're married, it's the biggest self-development journey you'll ever go on.
Mm.
Are there times I could take a hatchet to his head and walk away laughing? Yeah, absolutely. Um, I'm sure that's it. I always say to him, I'm sure it's the same for you. And he goes, no, I'd never do that. And I'm like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, liar.
Um, so, it's I think when you work with your partner, your husband, your significant other,
Mm.
it is about tapping into the strengths.
Mm.
So for me, I can do macro and micro. Dave's more of my macro person. He's very big
Mm.
picture, but it's like, okay, well, how are we going to make that happen?
Mm.
So initially, there's the frustrations of
Mm.
trying to work out who's good at what, who does what
Mm.
well. And also, you know, a lot of the time it was he was the big Mr. McQueen, David Magnificent McQueen, everybody knew who he was. And so it was all about, it was very much his business.
Mm.
And so there's lots of compromise that had to
Mm.
come about and working together, and also definitely recognizing those different skills,
Mm.
and learning to sometimes when to step back and just say, okay, you know what, knock yourself out.
Mm.
um and letting people learn for themselves and vice versa. And then there's other times where it's about, okay, no, gonna have to put my foot down. It's
Mm.
challenging.
Mm.
But it's, again, whether it's marriage or working with a business partner, it's definitely a self-development journey. And
Mm.
it's not about changing the other person, it's about you learning about yourself and learning
Mm.
how to navigate other people.
Mm.
Definitely.
Mm.
You definitely do have to lean into and develop that emotional intelligence, and develop recognizing that sometimes you're projecting what you
Mm.
think somebody is saying as opposed to
Mm.
what they're actually saying. So
Mm.
learning to listen, and also learning to sit down and have a conversation with yourself, sometimes before you have the conversation with the other person, and moving yourself from your shoes into theirs. Is this
Mm.
what they're really seeing, or is it
Mm.
what you're seeing? And we may not be seeing the same thing, 11 million bits of information at any one moment in time. And as human beings, we can only process around 50 bits of information of that information. That's a lot of information that we are
Wow.
missing.
That we're
So we
missing.
have to
Yeah.
get used. Yeah, we have to start getting used to recognizing that I no longer deal in absolutes, and I used to. So I no longer assume that he heard me.
Mm.
I no longer assume um, that he understood, and vice versa. I think we're both getting better at that, and still, we call it a work in progress. That's what
Mm.
our relationship in life is. It's a work in progress,
Mm.
because you may not have heard what I said. You might have
Mm.
been distracted. You might
Mm.
have only heard part of it. You might have heard what you thought I said, and that makes a really big difference to communication.
Agreed. One of the things that stood out for me was you said having a conversation with yourself before you have a conversation with them. What's an example of a conversation that you would have with yourself, for example, before going in? It doesn't have to be yourself, but you know what I mean, like an example of.
Yeah, no. So sometimes I'm going, okay, all right. So one of the questions I'll ask is that really true? Especially when I'm spiraling. So, well, especially when, yeah, he did that, and he means this, and he, like, hold on. And sometimes I have to say, stop, hold on a second. Is that really true? Is that what he was saying, or is that what you're saying he was saying? Stop a moment. What does that look like from his point of view? Does that, like the conversation is that, okay? Another question is, what do I want to get out of this? So, and what I mean by that is, if I go in railing, am I going to get the best result out of this? What questions do I need to ask? And remember, Madeline, if you go in with an accusation, you're not going to get the results that you want. Like, those are the kind of things that I'm having a conversation with myself about, and sometimes it's calm the hell down. Just calm down. And it's not, and the other thing I may say is it's not that deep. It's not that deep.
I really liked the what do you want as an outcome, and am I going to approach this in a way that gets to the outcome that I really want? Because I think that's really at the core of it. What it comes down to is, what outcome do we want, and is our approach going to match with that? One of the things that you mentioned was about emotional intelligence. What does emotional intelligence mean to you?
For me, it's about being in touch with your own self. And what I mean by that is understanding how things affect you, understanding your own emotions and your own emotional roller coaster. And then as a result of that, recognizing that is the same, it's not the same roller coaster, but that everybody has emotions. Everybody is having responses. Everybody is impacted by the environment and circumstances and things that are happening around them. And so for me, emotional intelligence is very much about being able to stop and take stock. And in doing so, that then impacting and influencing not just your conversations with yourself, but your conversations with other people too. Like, when you understand that emotions and feelings are often guiding and impacting our responses, then it gives you pause to consider how then you will communicate with whomsoever that may be, including yourself. So yeah, that's what it's about for me. I basically use as part of my work, the Roche Martin emotional capitalist report, that was, the book by, I can't remember what the book's called, by Martin Newman, about emotional intelligence and emotional capital. And, it's all based on the 10 competencies, like self-knowing, self-confidence, self-actualization, optimism, relationships. There's a number of them. There's 10 of them. And it's amazing how that report, I'm very much the kind of person that says, a psychometric test is a snapshot in time, and it's not a birch to beat yourself over the back with, like some people use it, right? And also it's about today. Depends on what's going on in your life today. It's going to impact those results. But I think it's useful for a conversation for self-reflection around what's really going on with you. So you can have really high self-knowing, but low self-confidence. Now, that's most probably because you're so self-evaluating that you're actually undermining your own self-confidence, or maybe my self control is low at the moment, but the reason why it's low is because I spent so much time being in control or trying to control my emotions and not actually speaking my truths, that I'm at a point in my life where I'm like, screw it. I'm not gonna hold it all together anymore. Or maybe my empathy is low because I've spent a lot of my time always considering everybody else to my own detriment. So it's not a case of, oh, well, it's low, that means it's bad. Let's look at the whole picture.
The
And
whole
I think
picture.
that's one of the things that around emotional intelligence is it's not enough just to listen. You also need to be able to reflect and review with yourself. It's not just about speaking I'm going to speak my truths. That's great, but also can we understand what is that about for me and what's that about for the other person?
I think the interplay of some of those factors is so interesting to think about, because I think you're right. We normally think of those things in isolation. Like my self-control is down, but we don't think about everything and how that fits together. So I think that's really, really powerful. And I think also what you said about the conversations you have with yourself, because I think that we all have conversations with ourselves, right, every day. But I think even sometimes hearing it back, it's weird to think I'm going to talk to myself.
Yes.
It's a bit of a weird, thought, but you do it all day, every day. Your self-talk is constantly there. So I think that's so important in terms of how do we improve the conversations that we have with ourselves? Are we asking ourselves the right questions? Are we talking to ourselves in a kind way, not a judging way? Like, all of those things are so important, and that's what I'm really, really taking from what you're saying.
Yeah. I think one of the
What was...
important things. Oh, go on. You were going to ask me a
No,
question.
you
Go
go.
ahead.
Sorry, you go. No,
I was just going to say, one of the things that I found, I started journaling. I never believed I could. I'd never believed I'd keep it up. But I started journaling in November 1999, and I've been journaling ever since. And I don't journal every day. I'm not a prescriptive journaler. And I don't, when I speak to clients about journaling, I'm not prescribing what they should write in it. But I think it's a great opportunity to have a conversation with yourself, to get out of your head what's going on in your mind, and actually to explore issues, challenges with other people, and get out all of these emotions, these feelings, so that you can then sort them and then come up with solutions to challenges and issues. And it's one of the ways of having that conversation with yourself.
I think it was Alison Fallon. She wrote a book about the power of writing it down. And she said that your writing voice is often quite different from your speaking voice. And do you find that sometimes when you write stuff down and then you read it back, you're like, did I say that? Like, it feels so different sometimes.
I find that in general, I don't tend to read back my journals.
Interesting.
Yeah, in general, I don't. I might go back and have a look at some things, like if it's goals or something I committed that I wanted to do, or maybe even affirmations I may have written down. But in general, I don't. I think it's because it's such a useful space for me to organize my thoughts that I normally feel at the end of it that I have organized. So I don't need to necessarily, unless maybe I've written some things that I wanted to remember. Like, I'm a firm believer of having a pen and paper journal, having it by your bed, that in the middle of the night when you wake up and you cannot think, you cannot, you can't sleep because your brain's doing overtime and you're thinking, but it's not good thinking. I think it's a great thing to sit down, to get that pen and pad out and write down your thoughts. I don't suggest switching the light on. I try and do it in as much darkness as I can,
Really?
but
In the
sometimes
dark?
I need a little bit of light to see where the hell I am. And I
Yeah.
will wake up in the morning to the most craziest writing. But what it's given me is the space to get my thoughts out, to maybe process some information, and then I can go actually back to sleep and sleep, because what was swirling is no longer swirling because it's now on paper.
That makes sense. That makes sense. What was your journey with emotional intelligence? Where did it start for you in terms of the realization that this is something that's important, this is something that you want to grow in?
I don't know if I've ever had that conversation with myself. I grew up the youngest of 6 girls. And our dad died when we were 10. And my mum was very much, you all need to know how to do things, how to look after yourselves. And so when you grow up with five other siblings,
Mhm.
yes, there's the fighting and everything, but you have to learn how
Mm.
to manage your emotions, um, and to deal with other complex, we're all complex beings, so other complex personalities.
Mm.
Uh, I also grew up in church, so I grew up as Seventh-day
Okay.
Adventist. I'm not anymore. Um, so that also brings with it its other nuances. And I think most probably in my 30s, I've always been I've always been a little bit different. But growing up in my 30s was when I left church. And I suppose that's when I started searching more about self-development in general. So it wasn't specifically emotional intelligence.
Emotional intelligence.
There was also went through some really difficult times financially, and recognizing that no one's coming to save me.
Mm.
There is no check coming through the post. And so I remember waking up in the middle of the night one night and going, "Oh, you have to be your own hero."
Mm.
And that's like a phrase I use often. Um, and so the thing was about not so much, I think it was covert when it,
Mm.
because I wouldn't have never said it so much emotional intelligence as it was about self-development. And that
Mm.
is, emotional intelligence comes with developing yourself.
Mm.
And that was the journey that I really went on, the things that I read, like Remove My Cheese and Feel the Fear and Do
Yeah.
It Anyway. And then there was also, the Rich Dad Poor Dad, and
Mm.
all of these things
Mm.
that were really about a lot more self-reflection, a lot more really thinking about who am I. I mean, I can't even go through the books I've read.
Mm.
Um, and I think the other thing is about, I think I've always been a compassionate person. I've always had a very strong sense of right and wrong.
Mm.
And so what I've had to learn is to live in the gray as well,
Mm.
which is recognizing that I think the big thing, maybe about, I don't know, maybe about 6, 7 years ago, was being about, I've always been very people focused, I'm solution focused and people focused. So the
Mm.
biggie for me has been about maybe longer than that, but recognizing humanity. I think so.
Mm.
I wouldn't have called it emotional intelligence, but that's what it was about
Mm.
recognizing the humanity of other people.
Mm.
So, for example, we get very angry and very frustrated with pedophiles, for example. And I'm like, okay, because this has been part of my emotional intelligence journey. It's very easy to get angry and frustrated, and what the whole thing about being a pedophile, it's a terrible thing. But can we actually look at what's the cause of this? It's
Mm.
not just you're a terrible person.
Mm.
If we look at people's life experiences and what they've been through, they may have been um, abused as a child. They may have been neglected emotionally as a child. And a client of mine said this thing to me once. She said, "You can be clothed, watered, and fed, and still be neglected."
Mm.
And so I'm very interested in the story behind the story, the
Mm.
person behind the story, and looking at the humanity of that. And I think that takes emotional intelligence. That takes stopping looking at just the symptoms
Outcome.
and starting
Mm.
looking at the cause of things. And that's
Mm.
what has been part of my emotional intelligence journey, is to look at humanity,
Mm.
um, and not just see somebody as a problem, but understand the layers of labels that have put
Mm.
them where they are, and the choices then that they have made on that journey based on the conditioning. People always say, "Oh, women who are abused, why don't they just leave?" Well, one of the reasons why they don't leave is because what they've experienced is that often may have experienced it as a child, have watched
Mm.
that happen in their family. This is their norm. That's normal. So if
Mm.
that's what I've grown up as normal, then that's what I experience,
Mm.
or that's my expectation in this world. And obviously, people change. People learn that it's not right, or they an inner something that says this isn't right, but this whole thing of, you should have just left. It's not that easy. But also understanding conditioning. And that for me is around emotional intelligence, of not looking at something just as what it is, but looking at the whole circumstance. And I think that's the journey I've definitely been on. So I grew up Seventh-day Adventist, homosexuality, an issue. I've had to learn to unpack that conditioning and see the person. You know what I mean? And take it out of the context of that conditioning and see who that person is and accept love is love, and so it's so many different ways. So I think unlearning the conditioning of growing up in church with those belief systems, for me, I appreciate it's different for different people. Having to learn how to manage a relationship, having to learn how to understand my clients, and then having to learn how to understand myself have definitely been my EQ journey.
There's so much challenging thought in that. I think even when you said about the paedophile thing, like there's an initial reaction that comes, and then understanding more about what you're saying is such a challenging journey, I think, with emotional intelligence. And I think you're right. It's, for me, EQ fits into all of the things that we've talked about, self-development, like all of those things. It's interwoven in between them. So I think you're right. It's a much bigger journey than just specifically emotional intelligence.
For sure. And the thing about it is, they are uncomfortable things to look at. They are, you just want to go, get angry. But we are speaking about human beings, other human beings. And, people aren't born bad. They're not born bad. This is mainly nurture, or how people are conditioned to respond to their life experiences. It's a lot of it might be some things that might be nature, but a lot of it is learning. And so my thing is, how do we work on deconditioning ourselves, and see people? And also, there's that phrase, but for the grace of God, there I go. We think that it could never be me, but actually, in the right circumstances, with the right things that happen to us, who knows who we could have, or even still turn out to be.
And I think that's quite the sobering thought, is that sometimes when you look at like people in prison, for example, like most of us are not that many decisions away from being in that position as well. And you're so right, like anything could happen to anybody, and you don't even know how people got there.
You don't know. You really don't know. Yeah. So yeah.
Just as we close, what's the best advice that you've ever been given?
That's really hard, because I think there's so many little things that have really impacted me on
Would you
this
prefer
journey.
top 3?
Yeah, that might be helpful.
Yeah, go ahead. Top 3. Top 3 is fine.
I think that the one phrase that has really been a piece of advice, I don't know if I've been given it, but that I've discovered, is I am enough. And that's something I have to remind myself of all the time, because it's so easy to fall into the trap of what other people think of you. And that I'm enough is also linked to your value and your worth, your self-worth, and how you view yourself and how you try to compete with other people. So there's a lot in that one. Another one that has certainly saved me in my life, and I think, especially growing up Caribbean, as a Black woman, Seventh-day Adventist, all of those things, wife, mother, is how easy it is to be involved. And it goes back to you are enough in other people's ish, to become the help, even when nobody asked you to help. So a phrase that has really saved me, certainly, is not my circus, not my monkey. It's so easy for us to get involved. And again, it goes to being in rooms where, taking responsibility for stuff that isn't really your responsibility. Do you know what I mean? Like, again, goes back to what I was saying about women, and Black women, and taking on all the roles, where you don't need to take on all the roles. So not my circus, not my monkey. You don't need to be involved. And the last one, I think, that comes to mind. I mean, there are so many. I might do a cheeky fourth.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is the quote: "If I'm too much for you, then quite frankly, you're not enough for me."
Wow.
And I say that because I think often, if you're big energy, if you're loud, if you speak your truths, then other people can have a problem with you. And that's not actually about you. That's about them and their insecurities. And often we take that on board and make ourselves fit into very small spaces that we don't fit into. We play small. And I refuse to do that. And that piece of advice has really made a difference for me. And the last one, I know it was only one, but never mind, we're on 4. But this will be my last one. One of the best books I read at the very beginning of my self-development journey was Susan Jeffers' Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And one of the things she said was, there's not a right path or a wrong path. There's only a path. And it doesn't matter which way you go. You will learn something on that journey. You'll gain skills. You may meet new people. And you can always divert and go off in a different way. I found that really helpful growing up in a very black and white environment, to recognizing that actually I don't have to have all the answers. I just need to take the path, and I'll find great stuff on the journey.
I love that. Thank you, Madeline, so much for your time, for your vulnerability, for your honesty. It's been a really, really empowering conversation. So thank you so much for sharing with us. I really appreciate it.
Tolu, thank you for having me. The pleasure has definitely been mine, and I've loved our conversation.
Thank you. And thank you guys for listening. And we will catch you on the next episode. Magnificently yours, Tolu and Madeline.
Yes, you said it! Bravehearts!
Feel the fear and do it anyway, right?
Absolutely. Oh, great.